Can you withstand the unknown? Investigate the shadows of a dilapidated asylum with a sinister past and an even more sinister present. This terrifying, mysterious, and untold tale is not for the weak of heart. A group of teenagers went inside the closed asylum in search of thrills and excitement. Unimaginable was what they discovered, though. The halls of the facility were haunted by a former insane doctor and ghostly kids. As they looked into the scary secrets of the asylum, one of their group members was taken over by a bad spirit. They battled to leave the asylum and keep their friend from going to hell. They were rejected for release from the asylum. It had been surviving for years off the suffering of its patients, and it wasn't going to let these teenagers go. As they made their way out, the group came face to face with the asylum's evil source. At the very end, they fought to drive it out of the asylum. Using a ritual from the top doctor's journal, they drove the evil force from the area. The crimes they committed and those they lost left a permanent mark on them. Dear viewer, use caution. Uncertainty is more frightening than you could imagine. Adventure is a lie. You might never come out of the darkness. Called The Abandoned Asylum. The teenagers crept through the overgrown courtyard of the abandoned asylum, each step sending a shiver down their spines. They had all heard the rumors about this place, but none of them truly believed in ghosts or haunted buildings. Yet, as they approached the rusted gate, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. One of the teens, a lanky boy with shaggy hair, tugged on the gate. It creaked open with a groan, revealing a path that led toward the sprawling brick building. As they stepped inside, the teenagers felt a chill run down their spines. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, and the only sound was the soft thud of their footsteps. They walked down the hallway, their eyes adjusting to the darkness. They could see cobwebs clinging to the walls and the flickering of candles in the distance. Suddenly, there was a loud creak from above, and they all froze in place. "Did you hear that?" whispered one of the girls. The others nodded, and they looked up at the ceiling, expecting to see a ghostly apparition or something equally terrifying. But there was nothing there, just the old, decaying wood. They continued on, their nerves on edge. As they reached the end of the hall, they heard a strange sound, like the rattling of chains. They followed the noise, their hearts pounding, until they reached a large metal door. It was locked tight, but they could hear the sounds coming from the other side. "Should we open it?" asked the shaggy-haired boy. The others hesitated, but then one of them spoke up. "We've come this far. We might as well see what's inside." The shaggy-haired boy pushed against the door with all his strength, and with a groan, it opened. The room was dark, but they could see the outlines of strange machines and tools. Suddenly, there was a loud clanging sound, and the room lit up with an eerie red light. The teenagers screamed and ran out of the room as fast as they could. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of the courtyard, panting and gasping for air. It was then that they realized that one of them was missing. They searched the courtyard, calling out their friend's name, but there was no response. They looked back at the asylum and could see a faint light coming from one of the windows. It was then that they knew they had to go back inside. As they approached the building, they could hear the sound of footsteps behind them. They turned around, expecting to see their missing friend, but instead saw something that chilled them to the bone. A ghostly figure, draped in a white hospital gown, was following them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The teenagers ran back inside the asylum, hoping to find their friend before it was too late. But as they searched through the dark, twisting hallways, they could feel the presence of something else. Something that had been waiting for them, all along. The remaining teenagers had split up to search for their missing friend, and as they wandered through the abandoned asylum, their footsteps echoed in the empty halls. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a room filled with children's toys and drawings. At first, it seemed like a haven of innocence amidst the decaying surroundings. But as they looked closer, they realized that something was off. The drawings were of ghostly children, with hollow eyes and twisted features. And as they looked around the room, they began to see glimpses of the children themselves, their ghostly apparitions flickering in and out of view. One of the teenagers, a girl with long blonde hair, reached out to touch one of the drawings. As her finger brushed against the paper, the world around them seemed to shift. The room became darker, colder, and more sinister. The ghostly children appeared before them, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. They seemed to be beckoning the teenagers to follow them, deeper into the asylum's dark secrets. Despite their fear, the teens followed the apparitions, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. They passed by rusted iron doors, peeling wallpaper, and cobwebbed corners, as they followed the ghostly children to a hidden corner of the asylum. There, in a small, forgotten room, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. The room was filled with dozens of dusty antique dolls, their faces twisted into grotesque expressions. Suddenly the dolls began to move. Their limbs creaked as they lifted themselves off the shelves, their eyes fixing on the terrified teenagers. The ghostly children began to laugh, and the dolls followed their lead, their movements becoming more and more frantic. The teenagers scrambled to leave the room, but the door had been locked behind them, trapping them inside. As they tried to find a way out, the ghostly children and the dolls closed in on them, their laughter becoming more and more hysterical. Just as the teenagers began to lose hope, they found a hidden passage, leading them to a forgotten part of the asylum. It was there, in a long-forgotten archive room, that they found the secrets of the ghostly children and their dolls. The children had been forgotten by the asylum staff and had died in their cells, their spirits trapped inside the walls. The dolls had been made by the staff to try and cheer up the children, but their twisted, eerie designs had only made things worse. The teenagers fled the archive room, their hearts pounding. As they left the asylum, they could hear the ghostly laughter and whispers of the children and their dolls echoing behind them. They knew that they would never forget the haunted history of that place, and the ghosts that still lingered within its walls. As the group of teenagers fled the haunted room filled with ghostly children and dolls, they stumbled upon the office of the asylum's former head doctor. The door was slightly ajar, and they pushed it open, eager to explore the next part of the abandoned asylum. The room was large and cluttered with old medical equipment and dusty leather-bound books. On the desk, they found the doctor's journal, filled with horrific descriptions of experiments and treatments he had performed on the patients in the asylum. As they read through the journal, the teens felt a deep sense of revulsion and horror. They were shocked at the doctor's cruelty and lack of empathy for the people he was supposed to be helping. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise coming from a hidden room at the back of the office. It sounded like someone was moaning in pain. The teens hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed open the door. The room was dark, and they could barely make out the shapes of the medical equipment and furniture. But as their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they saw the ghostly form of the doctor himself. He was standing in front of a patient, performing a twisted experiment. The patient was strapped to a table, screaming in agony as the doctor wielded a rusty scalpel. The teens were frozen in terror, unable to move or speak. The doctor turned to face them, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. He seemed to be staring straight through them, as if he was seeing something deep within their souls. The doctor's ghostly form began to move towards them, his scalpel glinting in the dim light. The teenagers realized that they were in grave danger, and turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind them. As they frantically searched for a way out, the doctor's laughter echoed through the room. They could hear the sounds of his twisted experiments in the background, as the ghostly doctor seemed to be relishing in the terror he was causing. Finally, they found a small window and managed to force it open. They crawled through the small opening, just as the doctor's ghostly form appeared behind them. The teens ran as fast as they could, the sound of the doctor's laughter and the screams of his victims ringing in their ears. As they left the abandoned asylum behind, the teenagers knew that they had uncovered something truly horrific. The ghostly presence of the mad doctor and his twisted experiments would stay with them forever, haunting their memories and dreams. As the group of teenagers emerged from the abandoned asylum, they were shaken to their very core. They had uncovered dark secrets and been pursued by ghostly apparitions, but little did they know, their troubles were far from over. One of the teenagers had been acting strange ever since they left the asylum. At first they thought it was just nerves, but as time passed, it became clear that something far more sinister was at work. The possessed teen began to speak in a strange, guttural language, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The others tried to calm their friend, but their efforts were in vain. The malevolent spirit that had possessed the teen was far too powerful. As they walked through the dark, deserted streets, the possessed teen began to lash out, attacking the others with supernatural strength. The rest of the group was forced to defend themselves, using anything they could find as makeshift weapons. The possessed teen's attacks grew more and more violent, and the others realized that they needed to find a way to break the hold that the malevolent spirit had over their friend. They searched desperately for a way to exorcise the spirit, but nothing seemed to work. As they wandered through the empty streets, they stumbled upon a local church. The group rushed inside, hoping that the power of faith would be enough to free their friend from the possession. The church was dark and foreboding, and the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. The group could feel the presence of the malevolent spirit lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As they began to perform the exorcism ritual, the possessed teen's attacks grew even more violent. They smashed windows and threw pews, their strength fueled by the evil spirit within them. The others refused to give up, however. They chanted and prayed with all their might, their voices growing stronger as they fought against the malevolent force. Finally, with a final burst of strength, the spirit was banished from the possessed teen's body. The teen collapsed to the ground, exhausted but unharmed. The group breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that they had defeated the evil that had threatened to consume them all. As they left the church and walked into the dawn, the teenagers knew that they had faced something truly horrific. The memories of their experiences would stay with them forever, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the abandoned places of the world. As the group ran from the church, they knew that they were not yet safe. They could feel the presence of the dark entity lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As they turned a corner, they saw the entity for the first time. It was a creature of pure darkness, a swirling mass of malevolent energy that seemed to feed on the fear and pain of its victims. The group froze in terror, unsure of what to do. But they knew that they couldn't run from this creature. They had to face it head-on, or risk being consumed by its evil. The entity let out a bone-chilling roar, and the group braced themselves for the final battle. At first, the group tried to attack the entity head-on. They threw everything they had at it, but nothing seemed to work. The entity was too powerful, too evil. But then, one of the group members had an idea. They remembered something they had read about in the head doctor's journal, a ritual that was said to banish the dark entity back to the realm from which it had come. The group quickly set to work, gathering the materials they needed for the ritual. They could feel the entity's malevolent energy growing stronger, but they refused to give up. They were determined to banish the evil from the asylum once and for all. As they began to perform the ritual, the entity began to lash out, its darkness spreading across the room like a tidal wave of pure evil. The group held on, their voices growing stronger with every passing moment. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the ritual was complete. The dark entity let out a final scream of agony, and then it was gone, banished back to the realm from which it had come. The group breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that they had succeeded where others had failed. They had banished the evil that had plagued the asylum for decades. As they walked away from the asylum, the group knew that they had been forever changed by their experience. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but they knew that they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. But they also knew that their experience could help others. They would share their story, warn others of the dangers of exploring abandoned places, and they would always remember the friends they had lost and the bravery that had brought them through the darkness. Thank you for joining us today on The Tale Keepers. We hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling tale and that it left you feeling a bit uneasy. If you want more horror stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets, some of which are better left undiscovered. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows.